SciAM, I guess is how you say the name of this magazine. I don't know. SciAM or SciAM. Dungeons & Dragons is shedding a race in gaming. Here's why it matters. The nerd culture powerhouse is rebranding its elves, dwarves, and orcs, previously referred to as races, and moving towards use of the term species. Now, we've talked about this a little bit, but this is just ridiculous that, if you call it species instead of race, that doesn't change anything. And I don't understand why people are so hung up on this. The only thing I think of is we use the term race to refer to different types of humans. And therefore, using the word race in this game is somehow bad. But what do I know? Right? I just do this stuff all the time on YouTube. I mean, I talk about this sort of garbage all the time on YouTube and how people have gone insane with this whole, everything's got to be PC, politically correct. Nothing can be offensive. Everything must be nice and safe and soft so that people feel included. Anyway, before we get started, please remember to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Make sure that you're still subscribed because YouTube doesn't subscribe people every single day. You can find me on Rumble, Twitter, BitChute, and Odyssey. Now let's dive into this article. Dungeons & Dragons now reigns as a cultural powerhouse, the OG of tabletop role-playing game. In its 50th anniversary year, the storied fantasy role-playing game is now making a long overdue and noteworthy correction to its scientifically benighted treatment of race. I don't know what he means here when he's saying scientifically benighted. Maybe I'm misusing the word benighted. I thought it meant to be overtaken by intellectual darkness. So scientifically overtaken by intellectual darkness. I don't get it. Maybe somebody can explain it to me down in the comments. Attacked by religious figures for supposed demonic ties in the 1980s, the game and its trappings now rule popular culture. No, I would say no. The game and its trappings do not rule popular culture. There's a lot of other stuff out there that competes with Dungeons & Dragons. I would say maybe it rules fantasy, medieval fantasy. I hate that term fantasy, by the way, in case you haven't heard me talk about this. Everything can be a fantasy. It's not real, right? I can just tell a simple little story. I stabbed myself with scissors. That's a fantasy. I've never done that. So stupid that our culture cannot use the language. A near miss. Well, the phrase a near miss means they actually hit, right? So ridiculous, but all right. I digress. You sit at a table with some pizza, dice, and friends and collectively engage with a story wherein you are a warrior or wizard or on a tale of heroism in a sword and sorcery world. What's new is that in September, the game's owner, Wizards of the Coast, will release a player's handbook that changes the terminology of its characters' physiological types, previously referred to as races, and replace them with the term species. Again, like I said, this doesn't change anything. What do we call them? Globadoos. Which are globadoo? Eventually, that would be a problem. Announced in 2022, the company's action was motivated by a view that species is a term that didn't require explanation and that highlighted the fantastical nature of the game's non-human option, according to Jeremy Crawford, game director at Dungeons & Dragons. It didn't require explanation before. Species requires much more of an explanation. Much more of an explanation. Let's find out what species means. Why not? Species. Definition. Okay. A group of living organisms consisting of similar individuals capable of exchanging genes or interbreeding. The species is the principal natural taxonomic unit, ranking below a genus and denoted by a Latin binomial, Homo sapiens. Okay, there you go. Well, that means that all the races in Dungeons & Dragons can now interbreed, if we're going to use the word species. Great. Since I was young, since I was probably 12 years old, I was already going like, why can humans and elves make babies? Why can orcs and humans make babies? That doesn't make sense. And then when I was 16 or so, I got introduced to Dark Sun. And I'm like, in that, dwarves and humans can make babies. I'm like, well, it kind of makes sense. If you got elves and humans making babies, why not have dwarves and humans making babies? And then they had half giants in there, which were magically created, fortunately, because I don't know how that would work out if they weren't. But you're saying right now that everything in here is a species, so that means everything can interbreed. I don't know. Wizards of the Coast should be congratulated for the move, both for the company's stated reasons and scientifically, as a correction from the long-running error of describing species as races. No, actually, I don't think they're wrong there. Let's see here. We'll look at race. Well, according to Bing here, it's only giving me verbs. You can only use it as a competition or moving fast. It doesn't have anything to do with what you look like. It says the fact of dividing people or of people being divided into such groups, categorization by race. Okay, so you're telling me that elves aren't people? Halflings aren't people? I don't know what to tell you guys. Kids playing a fun game will no longer pick up a botched, eugenical notion of race alongside their 20-sided dice. I never got that impression when I played. Never once did I go, well, like, we should be like killing off all elves. If that was part of the game, there was a setting where the elves were the primary antagonists and the goal was to exterminate them, kind of like with orcs. Like, orcs are, a primary antagonist in Dungeons & Dragons, especially in older versions. Orcs were commonly like, oh, you go fight orcs, okay. Yeah, and ideally I think we would all want them to be exterminated because they were anti-civilization, anti the goodly folks of the world. Some players welcome the change and the rationale behind the shift to species. However, others felt insulted, arguing Wizards of the Coast was giving into a woke mentality. Yes, they are. Fearful of invoking the word race. Still others appreciated the move, but felt it didn't go far enough.
And I say your 3-cent titanium tax doesn't go too far enough.
That's right, we should just destroy Dungeons & Dragons altogether. They recommended the removal of other material that could be deemed offensive. The last group is highly critical of the biological essentialism. Parroting scientific and evolutionary language to explain marked social and cultural differences between groups that comes with the use of the term race to distinguish between humans and others like elves, dwarves, orcs, particularly because of stereotyped real-world associations made at times to these fantasy species. Yeah, that's on you if you're making those associations. Now, this up here, what was it? Oh, yes. This is the new woke definition of race. This is the problem, is they're using a woke definition of the word race. They say right here, marks social and cultural differences between groups. Social and cultural differences between groups is how they're determining race. So you're telling me that the French people are a different race from the English people, that the English people are a different race from the Irish people, that the Irish are a different race from the Germans. No, those are all white people. Those are all Europeans. This is the problem that they're having. Now, when we see all this mixing, there are black people who have been born in Ireland and who've lived their entire lives in Ireland and know nothing of African culture, really, to speak of. Same thing with the United States, same thing with England, same thing with every European country. Same thing with Canada, Australia. But there are people who come from other parts of the world who are not Australian, whose ancestors were not Australian. And when I say Australian, I mean the country was founded by white people, for white people, and they called it Australia. The people who were indigenous there are also considered Australian on top of that. But the people who come from like India and settle there, they're not Australian, the way I'm talking right now, okay? Even if they have children who are born there and live their whole lives there, know nothing of India, they're not Australian. That's what I'm saying right now. But we know that all this mixing has happened all around the world, and therefore you're determining a person's race by the region that they grew up in. You're determining a person's race by their country, by their language, more so than you are by their genetic characteristics. This is the freaking problem. You people are so stupid, you don't understand what the term race actually means. And they also want to say, oh, well, like there's no differences between humans, so there's like one race. Yes, I understand this. If you want to get down to the brass tacks of it, yes, a race does refer to a different intellectual creature. Okay? So if there are aliens, they would be a different race from humans. And yes, humans would be their own race because we can all mate with each other. Like you might say that Homo habilis is a different race, assuming that we cannot interbreed with them. This is where D&D gets the term race, basically. It's by saying that you have this species, this creature that is different enough that you maybe could interbreed with it, but probably not. And they're going to have different abilities based on their genetics. Orcs are bigger and stronger than humans. Ogres are definitely bigger and stronger than humans. And this goes with size, too. I mean, right? The ogre over there who stands 10 feet tall is stronger than the halfling over here who stands 3.5 feet tall. Why? Because he's 10 feet tall. Don't be stupid about this. But no, they got to be stupid because, hey, they're woke. As a social scientist who studies male-dominated subcultures, yeah, there's just the worst, don't you know? I have done research that puts me in spaces where I delved into reactions to issues of race in gaming. A key question is this: given how charged the term race has been, why would games use it to discuss differences that have nothing to do with the way we traditionally use the word? Yeah, you're stupid, because we traditionally use the word to refer to other intelligent creatures. Words can have more than one meaning. As I looked up race earlier, and it talked about the foot race, it talked about water speeding past, etc. All of these other things where race has a different meaning than what you think it does. Dungeons and Dragons is not the only game to use the term in this way, so have many other digital and analog fantasy offerings. That's because they're using it correctly. But the celebrated game created by Gary Gygax, Dave Arneson, in 1973 arguably set the standard that these others have followed. Gygax and Arneson leaned heavily on popular fiction and folklore to construct their game world, and links to fantasy author J.R.R. Tolkien works which were first penned in an age of colonial racism. Really? Were they? Was it 1930s when he wrote Lord of the Rings? Let's see. Lord of the Rings. Wikipedia. 1937, yeah. 1937 was not colonial racism. What are you talking about? America had stopped colonizing at that point. What are you talking about? I think Hawaii was not a state yet, but it was already a colony of the United States, or some sort of territory or whatever of the United States. These people do not like... I mean, how long did it take me to look this up and figure out when Tolkien wrote... It took me a few seconds. Oh, let's look up Hawaii and see. Hawaii. Wiki. Yeah, Hawaii. When did it become a state? Well, it was annexed by the United States in 1898, so it was already a U.S. territory. It joined the Union in 1959. Okay, so it was already a territory in 1898, and then it became a state in 1959. So we were done colonizing by then. We hadn't colonized anything. People. Man, these people. In his Lord of the Rings trilogy, Tolkien commonly used the word race to characterize differences among humans, elves, hobbits, all the societies that populated his novel, because this was familiar territory for so-called sword and sorcery fans. The creators of Dungeons & Dragons simply co-opted it, and it would create a recognizable point of reference for potential gamers. Or no, maybe because elves and hobbits aren't the same race. So biological essentialism ran deep in the game. In its earliest versions, the authors distinguished between humans and other groups collectively called demi-humans. Notably, players who chose to be dwarves, elves, halflings, or other demi-humans had limits that humans did not have. They were lesser beings. They could only have certain professions in the game, referred to as classes, could only progress so far, and had built-in limitations. Further, all demi-humans had some form of seeing in the dark, which marked them as something in between humans and animals. No, I don't believe halflings can see in the dark. Dwarves, of course, live in caves. Elves can see in the dark, yes. Elves have keen senses regardless. Orcs can see in the dark because they live in the dark as well. Now, orcs were considered evil. They had half orcs. They could, of course, see in the dark. They were half human, half orc. Now, I have done a video where I did point out that the only racist game that I know of, as far as role-playing games are concerned, is Dungeons and Dragons. If you want to get down and split hairs and look at it very deeply and critically, yes, I would say the only game that I'm aware of has racism in it is Dungeons and Dragons. Okay, but you're reading way too much into this if you think that the word race needs to be changed because it refers to some sort of coding for human beings, like saying, oh, well, you're largely of English ancestry and anti-woke warrior, therefore you're an elf, okay, or a hobbit. But wow, these people, man, they really do have to keep pushing their agenda. Afraid it's going to die. The most often cited element of biological determinism in the early game, however, was a table created in first edition of the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons game that dictated which demi-human cultures would get along easily or have a natural dislike. Elves and dwarves had antipathy by fiat. Neither liked half-orcs, well, I wonder why, and gnomes for some reason also tolerated half-elves. Like I said, and I pointed this table out in the video that I made when I was saying the only game that I know of that is racist is this. I think that you should make your game world your own. if you want to purchase somebody else's game world and there's racism in it, that's the chance you freaking take. When you're playing a game, you should just make up your own game world and be like, this is the world that we're playing in. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be great. Now, it takes a lot of time to go into the nitty gritty and get all the details worked out. So maybe you don't want to do that. Okay, so then you purchase somebody else's game world that they spent years creating with a whole team. And if there's racism in there, ooh, so what? Newsflash. Everybody wants to do this thing like, hey, you know what? It doesn't matter that Nick Fury is a black man in the Marvel movies because it's not real. Guess what? D&D is not real. It's not at all. Dwarves and orcs don't exist in the real world. It's amazing. Well, I mean, dwarves, I guess you could say, like, there are little people who are classified as dwarves due to the structures of their body. But elves don't exist. Neither do halflings, neither ogres, dragons. All these things don't exist. It's a fantasy. If there's racism in your fantasy, it's a fantasy. This is often discussed in the same breath of evil races as different species were assigned an overall cultural moral stance, with some, such as orcs, deemed inherently evil, particularly since the influx of new fans with the 4th edition of Dungeons & Dragons. These ideas were roundly criticized by scholars and others as reinforcing a sense of nature, not nurture. In terms of racism, discrimination, and morality, echoing human genetics origins in white supremacy, marking some groups as inherently bad, scholars such as Benjamin Carpenter, University of East Anglia, have noted that the races labeled as evil had analogs that were sometimes associated with real-world racial and ethnic minority groups, essentially smuggling old prejudices and stereotypes through a game. Okay, then. I mean, they do this all the time. If you think that orcs are coded for any one of the races on Earth, then that's on you. That has nothing to do with the game. What about bugbears? Because unless you've played Dungeons & Dragons, you might not even know what a bugbear is. Oh man, there's so many different races in Dungeons & Dragons. There's so many different intelligent creatures that are evil. Why? Because you have to have something for the characters to fight. It has nothing to do with them being coded for any earthly peoples. There are games that I've played that I prefer over Dungeons & Dragons, because I prefer every game that I've played pretty much over Dungeons & Dragons. I think every game. Maybe not quite every game, but where orcs are good, or just they're just people. Sovereign Stone, I have never played Sovereign Stone, but I own the game, and I read it, and the orcs are just people. The same thing with Shadowrun. Shadowrun is awesome, by the way. If you've never played Shadowrun, you should get a copy of it. Don't get 4th edition. 3rd edition is, what I can tell, is really good. 5th edition seems to be good too. 6th edition I haven't looked at, so I don't know. Get a copy of Shadowrun. The orcs in there were people. Original orcs came directly from human beings. Everybody on one day of the year suddenly transformed. Not everybody. Some people stayed human, but many people transformed. Some became orcs, some became trolls, some became elves, and some became dwarves. And because of that, the orcs are just people. You treat them like everybody else. But people, of course, are being superficial and say, well, that guy's uglier than me, so he's not as cool as me. He's meaner than me. He's more evil than me. Orcs and Dungeons & Dragons are pure evil. They are evil. That's how they were originally intended. They were cannon fodder for the players to get experience. They were anti the good folks in the world. They were anti-civilization. They were predatory scavengers who hunted down intelligent people, even to eat them. Okay? Does that sound like somebody you want to invite over to dinner? So ridiculous. Throughout the years, different editions of Dungeons & Dragons have considered some of these components of essentialism. Level limitations for different racial groups were removed, along with game stats limitations on non-human species, providing different systems to explain their advantages and disadvantages. No. Okay, so levels are stupid. Levels are freaking terribly stupid. They are an awful idea.
I'm a 10th level vice president.
The only game I've seen where levels actually work is Talislanta, because you don't have to use your level. You can be like, I'm a 5th level whatever, but I have all these other skills and abilities that I just acquired on the side. Levels are ridiculous. That's why they removed the racial level limits, because there's just too many difficulties dealing with level and class. If you say, I'm this class, and then you, especially in early editions of Dungeons & Dragons, and you're saying, I'm a 3rd level fighter, you basically knew everything you needed to know about the character. If you knew what a 3rd level fighter looked like, that's it. They all looked the same, pretty much. You might have a different skill or two. You might have different stats that you rolled. Probably have different stats because that's a random roll. But you basically know everything you need to know about the character. He's a 3rd level fighter. Okay. Now, that's stupid. Why would you want to be locked into, I have this ability. I have to wait 10 levels to get this really cool ability I want. Why can't I eschew all these other abilities in between and just focus on getting that one cool ability that I want? Can't do that. Nope, that's against the rules. You can't do that. Why not? I want to get that one ability. That's the one that I want. Well, it's going to break the game. Levels are such an ingrained part of Dungeons & Dragons. You're never going to get away from them because the monster's abilities, like if you want to fight a monster, it'll tell you like this is a 15th level monster. So you have to have a group of characters who are 15th level to stand a chance against this monster. So stupid, so ridiculous. It makes the game in some ways easier, but you can do that just as easily by saying this is a 250 point monster. So your character should be 250 points to take on this monster. And if you're using a point system where you say you can use your points to do whatever you want to do, your character does not have to look anything like any other character. That's a much better system, much more creative system, much more fun system, much more enjoyable for everybody involved. But there's too many people out there who are sheep, who don't want to think and don't want to do this sort of stuff. Oh, there's so much work. Oh, I just want to pick up a game and play. Ugh. And I'm like, I'd rather not have to read a whole book to understand what's going to be happening in the setting and then play. I'd rather make it up in my mind and then write down some notes and then go, okay, this is what's going to happen and this is how it's going to work. But I don't know. Maybe I'm weird. Man, I don't even need to read any more of this. This is so stupid. We're almost at the end, but it's more woke garbage. Or, oh, we can't use this word because, it's not PC. It means orcs are black people. No, orcs are not black people. And we are dealing with a world here where they're saying like nature versus nurture. Yes, orcs were created. Trolls, elves, all those things were created. They didn't get the way that they are by living a bad life. Like they weren't born as a sociopath and then tortured by their parents so that they just wanted to grow up and hurt people. That's not what happened. What happened is the gods said, I want to create something to torment the elves. I'm going to make orcs. As far as the racial tolerance here, like elves and dwarves have antipathy. Well, that's because of the way that they wanted D&D to be. Was friction between different groups because of resources, etc. Like dwarves with a burning passion hate goblins, and goblins with a burning passion hate dwarves. Why? They both live in caves underground. Makes sense. They're both competing for the same resources, and one of those groups is pure evil, right? The goblins want to eat the dwarves, want to eat humans, want to violate their women, whereas the dwarves are like, no, we would let you live in peace and harmony, but you want to hurt us. As long as we can work out the details of where we're going to get resources from, how we're going to share all this stuff, we'd do that. Goblins don't have that ability. Therefore, they're evil. That's what it is. It's more relativism. You can't say somebody's bad. No, they're not bad. They're just misunderstood. No. If they want to kill you and they want to eat you, and they want to violate your women or your men or your children or anybody, they're evil. Okay? This is so easy to figure out, but these people, I don't even know. You can't argue stupid. You just can't argue with stupid people. Something you can't do. Anyway, D&D has been lost for years now. Play other games. Shadowrun's amazing. Talos Atlantis, amazing. It looks like they're coming out with a 6th edition Talos Atlantis. It looks terrible. But, I don't know. We'll see when it comes out. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see you all in the next video.